Hi there, Nick here from Conservation Careers and welcome to the podcast. Now today's guest is Sir William Worsley, who's the chair of the Forestry Commission. Sir William shares his rich experience in forestry management, conservation and the evolving mission of the Forestry Commission since its founding in 1919. In our chat, we discuss the Commission's role in afforestation, in timber production, wildlife conservation, and the importance of balanced woodland management. Sir William also shares his views on the economic and environmental significance of forests, practical insights for aspiring conservationists, and also what to expect from upcoming National Tree Week. It's a passionate, informative, and inspiring podcast about trees, landscapes, and how each of us can play a part in conservation. Enjoy.
Well, I'm William Worsley and I chair the Forestry Commission.
Wonderful. Well, really nice to invite you onto the podcast. Thank you for finding the time to chat today. The best place, an easy way to start here is let's talk about the Forestry Commission as an organisation. And as the chair of the Forestry Commission, you are well placed to discuss the organisation. What or who is the Forestry Commission? For people who haven't heard of it, we have an international audience here at Conservation Careers. Could you just paint a bit of a picture as to what the organisation is, please?
Well, the Forestry Commission was set up in 1919, following the First World War. And the reason for it being set up is that during the First World War, huge amounts of timber were used. And there was a deep concern in this country about timber security. And the initial principal objective of the Forestry Commission at that time was to get more trees planted. And indeed, in 1919, we had only 5% tree cover in England. And that's pretty shocking. What's interesting is that over the last 100 years, we've doubled the tree cover in the country. And this has been very largely led by the Forestry Commission. We now have 10% tree cover or forest cover. Not good enough, but it's quite a move in the right direction.
Yeah.
And the Forestry Commission is what's called a non-ministerial government department. And the reason for that is that forestry is a long-term game and it should be out with politics. Personally, I think that's really, really important because the political cycle is 5 years. The cycle of a tree is, well, from a Sitka spruce about 40 years, larch tree about 60 years, and an oak tree about 140 years. So there's a bit of a difference.
Yeah.
The Forest Commission today is a pretty different organisation to what it was in 1919, because whilst growing trees and timber production is still really, really important to us, we have a far broader brief, and a lot of lessons were learnt in forestry. In the 1950s and 1960s, huge amounts of square blocks of Sitka spruce were planted. Great for productive timber, terrible for landscape. And one of my other great passions is the landscape. And I've had a career involved in national parks and national landscapes. So I care deeply about that. And we've learned a huge amount about planting productive forestry in a much more environmentally sensitive way. And I think that's really, really important. Now, of course, I can go on and tell you about the Forest Commission today if you'd like.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, absolutely. As you were talking there and talking about, square blocks of Sitka spruce and, and their limitations, I'm interested, what does an ideal woodland look like from your perspective?
Well, it entirely depends what the owner's objectives are, whereabouts in the country, whereabouts in the landscape.
Yep.
But for me, I think productive forestry is really, really important. Now, people throw their hands up in horror and say conifers. Actually, conifers are not bad. Conifers sequestrate carbon far quicker than broadleaves. They grow faster. They keep their their leaves on all year round. And so the perfect wood for me would have, say, 70% productive. It will be a mix of species. I mean, I am a forester on my own right. I never plant single species. I hate single species. I think all trees should be different. And then it would probably have a 30 or so % a hardwood element. The edges, landscape dependent, and it's about trying to tick all the boxes. It's about trying to produce productive timber in an environmentally sustainable way. So you're providing a benefit to the landscape, you're providing benefit to the ecology, to the environment, access for people, nice walks, all that sort of thing. And so I think I'd probably describe it as a bit of a mixed wood.
Yeah, okay. Sounds like a nice place to be. Yeah. I was going to ask you about about why people should care about trees, and I think you're already kind of layering in why that might be. But could you sort of elaborate on that? Why should anyone listening really care about woodland and trees specifically?
I think trees and woods are really, really important because you can cover so many boxes. Timber itself is a great renewable resource. It locks up carbon, and we are in a carbon crisis at the moment. And the most cost-effective way to sequestrate carbon is trees. That's one. Trees are great for our wildlife. They are they're beautiful things, but an oak tree. I can't remember how many different bits of biodiversity, but it's hundreds. Each different tree benefits different bugs, bees, animals, etc. Health and well-being. Being able to go for a walk in a wood is so good for the mind. I also think one of my great passions has been community forests and urban and peri-urban trees. Again, really, really important. And then, of course, landscape. Design your woods right, and they can so beautify the landscape. In a previous role, I was chair of a national forest in the Midlands. This is an enormous success story. This was 200 square miles of the Midlands, sort of between Nottingham and Birmingham, that sort of area.
I've visited actually, yeah, absolutely, walked through it, yeah.
Well, I'm completely passionate about it, and about 30 odd years ago, it was created, and it had, I think, 6% tree cover at the time. It was an area of land that had been decimated by heavy industry, mining, quarrying, and it was pretty grim. And this initiative to create the national forest was made, and we are now at 25% tree cover. 80% of the woods have public access. It's changed the landscape, and I hope before I die it will be made a national landscape, and that will show how you can transform a landscape with the planting of trees. It's also made it a much nicer place to live. People's houses are worth more. And of course, if you look at a lot of our really important landscapes, look at the North York Moors or look at the Yorkshire Dales, they were largely industrial landscapes 150 years ago. So using trees, we can so improve our environment.
Yeah, I love that as well. Yeah. Interesting what you said there about health and well-being as well. I think something that really connects with a lot of people. I think particularly since COVID and lockdown and people reconnecting with local environments, getting out into woodland nature, it's really benefited people, hasn't it?
Well, we all suffered in different degrees from COVID.
Yeah.
I was really lucky. I was locked down in North Yorkshire, but I felt so much for people locked down in tower blocks in inner London. And I spent a lot of my life in London with my Forestry Commission role. And I wore out a pair of walking shoes during COVID. And the benefit of being able to walk in our countryside was so wonderful. And I really felt for those that couldn't. And I remember not long after, my daughter, who was working in London, coming back saying, "I've got to go for a walk in the woods. I need a break." And trees, they give something. And the benefit of trees in our landscape are just enormous.
Yeah. Yeah. I was wondering if you could give us a bit of a picture as to some of the kind of wildlife conservation activities of the Forestry Commission. Obviously our audience are really interested in wildlife conservation. It's a key pillar of what you do at the Forestry Commission. Well, yeah, give us a bit of an idea of the projects, programs, things that you think kind of bring it to life.
Oh gosh, well, we've got lots of people involved in conservation,
Hmm.
whether they're ecologists, whether they're wildlife rangers, whether they're archaeologists.
Mm.
And I mean, one thing, I mean, it's actually, it is more challenging to get consent to plant a wood than to build a house.
Mm.
That's quite shocking.
Yeah.
But it shows that when we look at planting woods, we care very deeply about trying to get it right.
Hmm.
And it's not easy. If you plant a wood, it's there forever.
Mm.
And it's mistakes have been made in the past, and the key now is to getting it right.
Mm.
But if you manage your woods in a sensitive way, you manage the wildlife. And I'm going to have to be critical here of the grey squirrel and the deer who are devastating our forests.
Hmm.
They need managing. Down in the Forest of Dean, we've got wild boar. They
Hmm.
need managing. Now, you can say you shouldn't manage, but actually, I would disagree because you have to keep the level and the balance right.
Hmm.
But also, we've done a lot of what is now trendy known as rewilding in the Forestry Commission.
Mm.
A certain amount of land that was planted shouldn't have been planted. It was planted on deep peat. Mistakes were made. People, we've all learned the lessons. We've got a lot of schemes up in Northumberland of landscape improvement. I think that's really, really exciting. So the Forest Commission is, you think of it as a timber growing business. Actually, it's far greater than that. 40% of our turnover comes from recreation. We're the largest outdoor recreation providers in the country. And we do try very hard to manage our estates. And we're the largest land managers in England. We try to manage our estates in an environmentally and commercially sensitive manner.
Mm. So it's really about balance, is what I'm hearing. Yeah, it's about
Land
balancing.
management is about balance.
Mm.
Almost always, there's no right or wrong.
Mm.
It's not black or white. It's shades of grey. And I mean, I'm a professional land manager, and I spent all my career trying to get it right. It's not easy. It really isn't. And of course, some people are more interested in one side of things than others.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's about trying to get it as good as you possibly can. Perfect isn't possible, and in many ways, perfection is the enemy of good. So what we're looking at is good planting schemes.
Yeah.
We're looking at schemes that are beneficial, and I hope will in time become wonderful.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. As you were talking there about the management species, deer, grey squirrels, get this right, not red squirrels.
Please get that right. Red squirrels are wonderful.
Absolutely. Yeah. Correcting myself quickly there. Wild boar, you mentioned there too. I guess traditionally they would have been managed by some of the kind of the higher up predators, which are now not existing in our landscape. We're talking wolves, lynx, so forth. Where do you or even the Forestry Commission stand on some of these kind of bigger predators being reintroduced as part of maybe rewilding projects?
It's a really, really interesting one, this. Of course, none of those species have been in this country for 1,000 years plus. We also live in a pretty densely populated country. We've done quite a number of trials of beaver reintroduction. There's a wonderful trial up in Cropton Forest on the edge of the North York Moors that I've been to every year to watch and see how it develops. And I think it's really interesting. And I think there's real potential. There's also looking at controlling grey squirrel. There's got a complete blank on what they're called. I'll tell you in a sec. But these things slip one's mind, but it'll come back. But there's an introduction of those, and get them right, and we can manage better grey squirrel. So predators are important. Things like lynx, wolves, not quite so convinced, if I'm really blunt. Others are obsessed about them. I need a bit of persuading, I suppose, in part because I've seen introductions to this country, the grey squirrel being one, fallow deer being another. But at the time people brought them in, they thought they were great. Actually, they've been a disaster. So I think you just have to be careful.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let's talk about the different roles and jobs before we talk about your own job and role and career as well. So within the Forestry Commission, I know this is a really big question, but what are the different jobs and roles available, as an employer, and maybe particularly focusing in on kind of the wildlife conservation related roles?
Well, gosh, I mean, it's huge. I mean, Forestry Commission, and in particular Forestry England. Let me just before going to this, let me just explain what the Forestry Commission is, because I started talking about Forestry Commission, but rather generally. Forestry Commission has three very distinct parts. The first part is Forestry England. Forestry England manages the nation's forests, about 250,000 hectares of land, spread between Kielder in the north down to Cornwall, Kent, and all over the rest of the country. So a very substantial amount of woodland. And as I said, we are the largest outdoor recreation provider. So huge amounts of cycling, walking, camping, all takes place in the nation's forest. Then you've got forest research. Forest research is England, Scotland, and Wales. It is a quite significant research business, full of scientists. And they do some really fabulous work. And then Forest Services, which is the regulatory and grant-giving part of the commission. And that's about stopping people felling trees without permission, giving grants to people to plant land, regulating, managing, supporting, encouraging, advising, and all of that sort of thing. So it's a pretty broad business. So looking at jobs in the Forestry Commission, well, you can be a scientist, you can be a forest scientist, and work in our research organization, and that's all around the country. Then you can be a forester, you can be managing a forest, you can be an ecologist, advising about planting, you can be an archaeologist, making sure trees and woods aren't planted on the wrong places. You can be in the recreation world, running visitor centres, and we've got some wonderful visitor centres across the country. We've got a lot of camping. We've got forest holidays in our woods. Huge variety of different things. You won't necessarily think about forestry. And then, of course, the regulatory side, there's a lot of people working in different sides of regulation, whether it's enforcement for stopping people chopping down woods that they shouldn't, or getting out there as woodland officers and encouraging people to plant, working with people. And I'm very keen that Forestry Commission is seen as being an organization that is on side. It's working with landowners and land managers and farmers, encouraging them, helping them, advising them, guiding them. And I think that's really important. And then the other thing to say, one of the things I'm really proud of the Forestry Commission is we're about 45% female in our staff, 55% male, and you'd be surprised about that as a sort of land management business. And I think that's really good. And I mean, I say that because I actually genuinely care, because I'm a land agent by profession. I'm a chartered surveyor. And I've seen my profession change hugely during my career. And I'm particularly pleased because my grandmother was the first woman ever to qualify as a land agent in the 1920s, when she sat in a room full of men. And I thought, and she was a wonderful, wonderful woman. And so I've always been rather keen on that. And I remember when I went to get my professional qualification, I used to line up in front of the president of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. And it was Nick Askew, whose father's a land agent, and somebody else whose uncle's a land agent. It came to me and he went, William Worsley, whose grandmother. And I think that's rather wonderful.
Oh, I do too. Fantastic, yeah. So you've touched there also on your own career and your own path and where you came from as well. So I'd love to kind of dig more into that. Can you just paint us like a little brief potted history of your career? Yeah, so far. Are there any particular key moments, milestones, pivotal, stepping stones, however you want to kind of, frame it?
I suppose so. I have to admit that my academic career was not stellar.
Right.
I'm dyslexic, and for dyslexics, exams and school are terrible. At my time, I was just told I was thick. It actually made me very, very determined. So I think that's rather good.
We
I
share
went to
that. I'm
agricultural
dyslexic
college.
too, so yeah.
Sorry?
Yeah.
I went to agricultural college. I then trained as a chartered surveyor. I got qualified, and then I worked for a while in the profession, and I realised I needed to make some money. It's quite an important thing in life, and so I slightly changed my career, and I went into property development and work, basically in London. Really interesting. And then my father wanted me to take over the farm and things at home. And so I sort of did. And it took me rather longer to get things sorted there than I wanted. But I then, from then on, I was never able to have a full-time job. So I've had lots of other jobs on the side. I was very involved in building societies. I worked part-time in the city, in private banking. And then I got, my sort of business career was really going quite well. And I then got sucked into the CLA, the Country Land and Business Association. And it's very stimulating, very interesting. And for someone who's dyslexic, mastering the brief was a wonderful challenge to take on. And I really enjoyed doing that. And so I was involved with the CLA for about 10 years and ended up as president of the CLA. And it's a very important, very good, very far-thinking organization. And it's also about public service and giving back. And alongside all of this, I sat for a bit on the North York Moors National Park Authority. And for years, I've been involved. Indeed, I've just stepped down to my second term as chair of the Hull Woodland Hills National Landscape. So that's always had a part-time. So I suppose in many ways, I'm a man of many parts. Anyway, following on from the CLA, I chair the National Forest Company. I then was asked by Michael Gove to become the government's tree champion, the tree czar. It was rather wonderful. And my job was to get on and promote tree planting. And I really enjoyed doing that. And doing that alongside being chair of the National Forest actually worked really, really well together. It was a great story. It enabled me to promote the National Forest and to raise the profile of trees. And if you remember the 1919 election, political parties were vying with each other as who was going to plant the most trees. And I consider that a credit to the job I'd been doing. You might note at the last election, it wasn't mentioned at all.
That's true. Yeah.
And then the Forestry Commission chair role came up, and I thought it was the obvious next step from the tree champion to do that, because it gave me the resource to be able to do what I'd been preaching. And one of the things as a land manager, it's very easy if you're a campaigner to campaign about things. Because you can stand on your soapbox and you can shout and you can talk and you can explain. It's much more challenging if you're a land manager, because not only do you do the talking, but you actually have to deliver.
Mm,
And as a farmer and as a land manager, I do understand about the challenges of delivery.
mm,
And I also understand, we talk about the three pillars of sustainability: social, environmental, and financial.
mm,
And social and environmental are easy to talk about.
mm,
Financial is more difficult.
mm,
Without the money, you can't get the other two.
mm,
And it's no good expecting everything just to come from government.
mm,
We've got to make the rural economy financially self-sufficient.
mm.
And that has always been, in my view, one of the greatest challenges in my career. I also have responsibility for quite a lot of heritage property,
Mm.
very expensive. It needs funding.
Yeah, a portfolio career probably
It's
is one way of
a lot of
describing what I've
people.
heard.
A lot of people get portfolio careers later in their lives because I had sort of responsibilities at home. Mine started fairly early.
Yeah. I'm really interested to hear more about the kind of finance side of woodland management. Yeah, that really kind of speaks to me actually about woodland needing to be financially viable in
Yeah.
order to pay for the other benefits we're looking to create in the longer term. Kind of harking back to what you're saying about the long-term approach of managing woodland. I know I think I'm right in saying about 10% of Forestry Commission funding comes from government. I think I read that this morning on the website. So 90% comes from elsewhere, and it's a challenge to raise funding for woodland. Where do you see as the opportunities for securing the financial future for woodland as a land manager, as an owner, as someone who is a farmer? Yeah.
Well, when I take people around my woods at home, I quite like to go to a place where there's a wonderful old oak tree and a beautiful old larch tree.
Mm,
And I point at the larch tree and say, without that, you can't have that, pointing at the
mm,
oak tree. And the bit of forestry that makes money, and I'm talking about timber production, is
mm,
the conifer plantations.
mm,
And if I tell you that we import 81% of our timber into this country,
mm,
um, and we are the second biggest importer of timber in the world after China. We swap occasionally with America on this, but at the moment we're
gosh.
number two. If I tell you that England produces only 6% of its timber that it uses, and if I tell you that a lot of European countries, we import a huge amount, for example, from Sweden,
Yeah.
will be reducing their exports very significantly over the next 10 to 15 years, I think we have a real challenge of timber security.
Mm,
And we talk about food security. The NFU have been doing a great job talking about that, and there's an acknowledgement. But I believe we have a huge challenge on timber security.
mm-hmm,
Now, there are other ways you can make money out of your woods.
mm,
If you're lucky and you can have a car park,
mm-hmm,
so um, you can sort of create, you can manage the access point.
yeah,
You can charge for car parking, and Forestry England does a lot of that very successfully
yeah,
because Forestry England may be the nation's forest, but it costs,
yeah,
so it needs to raise funds. Um, there's other things like forest holidays that we do in Forestry England,
mm-hmm,
more difficult for the private
mm,
um, private landowner unless they've got the site.
yeah,
Um, there are other things, but it is challenging. You can have bicycle races or tough mudder or all those sort of things on your
yeah,
land, but your land's got to be in the right place. So it's really difficult, and forestry in this country has been difficult for the last 30 years.
mm,
Um, and to be able to make proper money out of forestry is really, really challenging.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about National Trees Week. That's something we want to talk about on the podcast and sort of turn into that. Now, I know it's the 23rd of November to the 1st of December, so it's about, well, just under 2 weeks away as we're talking here on the 11th on Armistice Day today. What is National Trees Week? Just give us a bit of an overview of what that is, please. Yeah.
Well, National Tree Week is it was initially set up by the Tree Council. I think it was following the Dutch elm disease, and there was this great thing: plant a tree in '73. That's going back quite a long way. And I'd love to say that I knew all about it, but I'm afraid it was slightly before my time. But the Tree Council's been going since then, and they've had National Tree Week in place. And it's really the beginning of the tree planting season. And you plant trees between the middle of November and the beginning of March. And it's about raising the profile of trees. And it's about getting organizations together to raise the profile of tree planting. And the Forestry Commission supports National Tree Week through a range of communications. I mean, you and me talking to each other is all part of raising the profile of National Tree Week. We like to try and make some announcements in National Tree Week in order to raise its profile. But it's about showing how important trees are, its opportunity in the year to be able to sort of fly the flag.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, and there's lots of ways for people to get involved. I'm right. There are
lots of ways for people to get involved.
What sort of things can people do? Yeah.
Well, there's. I mean, I went. There's a marvelous forest down in Derbyshire called the Young People's Forest, done by the Woodland Trust. And we had a wonderful planting day down there in National Tree Week, and it's getting people out into the woods or onto the land in order to get trees planted. And it's also an opportunity to educate farmers, landowners, and the wider general public about all the environmental benefits of tree planting and tree management. We talked a lot about planting, but I do want also to talk about the importance of managing our woods, because that's really, really important.
Yeah. What are the key aspects of management that you'd like to discuss then? Once the trees are there, they're established, becoming established, what things should people be bearing in mind as the activities undertake?
About 60% of the woods in this country are unmanaged. In my view, that's far too high. And the reason for managing woods, and that's about thinning them out, getting the light to the ground, is it improves them environmentally. It also improves the quality of the trees, gives them space to grow, makes them grow faster, makes them grow better. But it's as much as anything getting the light into the woods in order to help the wildlife and help the basic ecology.
Wonderful, great. What will you be doing during National Trees Week? Do you have any plans yet yourself?
Gosh, I better have a quick look at my diary.
Slightly on the spot, sorry.
You put me on the spot there. I can tell you in a second, I'll be planting trees.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the thing to do, yeah.
And actually, I'm going up to Scotland that week to look at some trees being planted up there. So I shall start my week in London. I shall then be at Alice Holt, which is our forest research based down in Hampshire. And then I'm going up to Scotland for a couple of days to look at some tree planting in Scotland.
Great. Sounds great. Lots of travel. Before we wrap up then, and after our recording, we're going to hand over to our audience that are listening here. They can ask some questions, share some reflections themselves. I'd like to just ask some more open questions of you if I can, Sir William. So one is a simple question, but yeah, it's not always so simple to answer. Very straightforward. If I could take you to one place on the planet and you could see one species, where would you like to go and what would you like to see?
The awful thing to tell you is about a mile away from here, there's a wonderful tree called the king oak. It's an oak tree, probably planted about 700 years ago.
Yeah.
I'd be there.
Lovely. You could walk to that. Yeah.
I can easily, and I do regularly. And there are many other places. I love travel, so I'm not being very adventurous on that one.
Yeah.
But I particularly love that tree.
Yeah. How lovely. Great. A couple more questions, if I may. One is, when we look at wildlife conservation generally, biodiversity, nature, whatever we want to call it, a lot of the signals are that things are getting worse, and things are getting worse rapidly across the planet. What do you think wildlife conservationists, as a sector as a whole generally, need to do more of or be better at? How are we going to turn this around?
I think the first thing that, and I think you're right, we're not in a great place. We all know that.
Mm.
I think the first thing is we don't give up.
Hmm.
I think the second thing is we must understand the economics.
Mm.
And I think that's really important. I think the idea that this can all be funded by government, bearing in mind our government ain't got no money,
Mm.
is naive. Um, I think it's working together with, and I think it's really worth working together with land managers. Most land managers, and I travel a huge amount around this country. I mean, it's a bit bonkers, really. I'm very good. I go by train, so I try to, I'm aware of my carbon footprint.
Mm.
But I do travel all over. It's one of the great perks of what I do.
Yeah.
And meeting foresters is wonderful because they are the most wonderful, wonderful people.
Mm.
Um, but it's about working with people. So
Mm.
it's not about sort of conflict. It's about trying to get alongside people, helping, advising people. Most farmers and land managers want the best. They care very deeply about their land. And I've met, having had a role leading the major landowner organization, I've met many of them. So I think it's about engagement with, it's about persuasion. It's about persuading people this is the way they should be looking at it.
Yeah.
But in all of it, you must understand the economics.
Mm.
Now, that sounds rather brutal, but to a degree, I can only do what I do because earlier in my career, I made a bit of money doing other things.
Mm. Mm.
And therefore, I can now do something that I care deeply about. And I think my job is about the best job in the world.
Yeah.
Because actually, I can do something about it.
Yeah. And on that, I guess as my final wrap-up question, talking about can doing something about it and keeping going as well, looking back to your previous answer, um, are you optimistic for the future of our environment? And if so, well, I'm going to stop there. Are you optimistic? How are you feeling about our future?
The first thing I've got to qualify this by saying is I'm a glass half full person.
Hmm.
Yes, I think that, I mean, I've been involved in the land management sector for a long time.
Mm.
I've also been a farmer for quite a long time. We are doing things way better than we used to. If I look at my farming operation, looking at my sprayer, for example, it's very sophisticated. So it's only putting the spray on exactly the right place where it needs to be.
Mm.
Um, it's, we have learned, we do care. I mean, every year I go to Groundswell, the wonderful regenerative farming show, and it's great. One of the things I love is you go around and you see, farming families being led around by, son or daughter who's taking mum and dad. And I think all that's great. So no, I am optimistic.
Yeah.
But I think you have to be optimistic because if you give up, we all stop doing it.
Yeah.
And doing what we're doing. So what you're doing and advising people in conservation careers is really good stuff. And the other thing is looking at the people who come and work at the Forestry Commission.
Mm.
And 10, 20 years ago, it wasn't a cool place to be. Now, actually, you've got all these people wanting to come and work at the Forestry Commission because actually it's somewhere you can do something.
Mm.
And it's all well and good sitting, in a chair, sort of pontificating. I think it's really important to get on out there and do something.
Yeah. I'm going to be cheeky and ask one more question, if I may. What careers advice do you have for people who might be listening who would love to say work for the Forestry Commission or to work in the kind of forestry sector, particularly again relating to kind of wildlife conservation?
I think as somebody who early on in his career qualified as a chartered surveyor, and indeed I have to say, a couple of years ago, I decided I'd have a crack at qualifying as a chartered forester, which I did.
Mm.
And I did it because I wanted to show how important it was to get qualified. So I think learning skills is really important. If you've got skills that you can bring to the party, you are somebody of value. So I think get out there, learn valuable skills. There are lots of skills that I think is a complete waste of time. Sorry, but that's bad.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think relevant skills to what you want to do, whether it's, become a chartered forester if you want to become a forester. You've got a degree in whatever, go into a master's in land management. My son's just gone and done that, for example. There are quite a lot of ways that you can skill yourself up. We've got tremendous apprentices in the Forestry Commission. We've got some absolutely wonderful people from very, very top universities in our postgraduate program. And so I see some really, really good young people coming into the Forestry Commission. I also see quite a lot of people at sort of change of career stage coming in. We've had people working in the city who've decided, that that's not for them anymore. Okay, perhaps like me, they've made a little bit of money and can go and do something with it. So I think skill or reskill, and then I think you bring something to the party.
Yeah, wonderful. On that note, and that was my last question, I promise. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been wonderful talking to you. Thank you, Sir William, for jumping on the podcast. And if anyone wants to join National Trees Week, we encourage them to do so. We'll drop a link in our podcast description.
Nick, thank you very much indeed. It's been really good to talk to you.
Likewise. Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'll stop recording there. So that's lovely. Thank you. Are you... Okay, I hope you enjoyed that, everyone. If you did, then please do hit the subscribe button to get notified of new episodes as they drop. And also, please give us a rating or a review because it really helps us to get in front of more people, and we really enjoy reading them all. As you'll have heard, our podcasts are now recorded in front of a live audience who sit in and listen to the chat, and then after the mics are turned off, they get a chance to talk to the host, to share their thoughts, and also to ask questions. It's a really great format. If you'd like to be in the audience, all you need to do is join the Conservation Careers Academy. Now, in the Conservation Careers Academy, you'll get full access to the world's biggest conservation job board, listing over 15,000 jobs, volunteer and internships across the globe each year. You'll also enjoy access to our amazing CC Pro private members community with regular events, networking and support. Plus, you'll get full access to our growing library of career-boosting resources, guides and templates. And best of all, it only costs a few dollars, euros or pounds per month to join the Academy. Now, to find out more, please visit conservation-careers.com/academy or simply click the join button at the top of our website. See you on the inside.